Elena had everything a person could want. She was a wealthy, successful businesswoman who had climbed her way to the top. With her sharp mind and relentless ambition, she had built an empire that few dared to challenge. Her high-rise office looked out over the city, a perfect reflection of her power and status. The sleek, shiny sports car she drove was as much a symbol of her wealth as it was a tool for getting her from one place to the next. Elena never had to wait, never had to settle for less than the best. She didn't just live a life of luxury, she relished in it. And why shouldn't she? Every part of her life seemed like a reward for years of hard work. But there was one thing about Elena that everyone around her noticed: her arrogance. She had little patience for people she considered beneath her, and those in lower socioeconomic positions were often the target of her dismissive remarks. Whether it was the janitor in her office building or the waiter at her favorite restaurant, Elena was quick to look down on anyone who didn't live up to her high standards. One morning, as she prepared for an important meeting, Elena found herself in a bit of a rush. Her car was being detailed, and there was no way she would be able to make it to her destination in time without traffic. Irritated but unwilling to drive herself in such a hectic moment, she called a taxi. The taxi pulled up, and as Elena slid into the back seat, she couldn't help but notice the vehicle's less than impressive appearance. The car was older, the leather seats slightly worn, and the engine sounded as though it had seen better days. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair, looked at her through the rearview mirror. His eyes were tired but kind, his hands steady on the wheel. "Good morning, ma'am. Where to?" he asked politely. Elena glanced at him, sizing him up in a split second. His worn clothes and the crumpled uniform told her everything she needed to know. He was just another man stuck in a dead-end job, living a life she couldn't even begin to understand. She crossed her arms, settling into the seat with a smug expression. "Could you hurry up?" she snapped, her voice dripping with impatience. "I don't have all day." The driver nodded, his face unreadable. Elena's eyes scanned the car again. "I really don't know how you people can stand driving these old things," she said with a chuckle, her words laced with sarcasm. "No wonder you're still stuck in this job. Must be tough, huh?" The driver, Frank, didn't respond. He just kept his hands on the wheel and kept his gaze on the road. Elena wasn't used to being ignored, but she didn't let it bother her. She continued, her voice growing sharper. "Honestly, don't you ever wonder what it would be like to have something better?" she asked, her tone dismissive. "I mean, this car, this job, it's almost like you've accepted that this is your life." Frank didn't flinch, nor did he react to her jabs. He simply gave a quiet, "I'm just doing my best." Elena rolled her eyes, unimpressed. "Your best?" she laughed, a high, mocking sound. "I don't think your best is enough for anything more than this. You're never going to get ahead if you don't change your mindset." The drive continued in silence, with Elena's occasional sneer the only sound in the car. When they arrived at her destination, Elena opened her purse and handed him the fare, leaving a tip smaller than what she'd normally give. It wasn't much, but enough to remind him who was in charge. "Have a good day," she said, the words dripping with condescension, before stepping out of the cab and walking into her high-rise building without a second glance. The morning after the encounter with Frank, Elena was back in her usual element. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office as she prepared for the most important board meeting of the year. This deal was the key to expanding her business empire into new territories, securing her place as one of the most powerful women in the corporate world. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. She carefully selected her outfit, a sharp, tailored suit that oozed confidence, and made sure her hair was perfectly styled. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the presentation slides to the coffee order for her colleagues. She was ready to dominate, as usual. As Elena sat down at the head of the table, she surveyed the faces of the people in the room. Her business partners, the key stakeholders, everyone she needed to impress was here. The deal was going to be finalized today, and she had no doubts about her ability to lead the discussion. Elena was always the one in control, always the one who called the shots. The meeting began, and Elena spoke with ease, her voice smooth and assured as she outlined the terms of the deal. She glanced around at the others, noting their attentive expressions. She knew they admired her. They feared her too, to some extent. Elena had built a reputation for being tough, demanding, and not afraid to walk over anyone to get what she wanted. But today, it seemed like nothing could stand in her way. Then, without warning, the door to the boardroom opened. Elena glanced up, expecting one of the usual team members to enter with updates or documents. Instead, her heart skipped a beat as she saw who was standing in the doorway. It was Frank, the same Frank, the taxi driver from yesterday. But today, he was not wearing the faded uniform of a cabbie. No, today he was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that screamed sophistication and wealth. His posture was confident, his expression calm, and his eyes seemed to pierce through her. Elena froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The room fell silent as Frank stepped inside, his presence commanding attention. For a moment, she couldn't comprehend how this was possible. How was this man she had mocked and belittled, now walking into her boardroom, appearing as if he belonged here more than anyone else? He didn't seem to notice the shock on her face as he made his way to the head of the table, taking his seat with ease. Elena's eyes widened even more, and her mind raced. She searched for an explanation, any explanation, but none came. "Good morning, everyone," Frank said, his voice calm and authoritative, as if he were a regular part of the team. "I trust we're ready to discuss the final terms of the deal." Elena could barely keep her composure. Her thoughts were swirling in a storm of confusion and disbelief. He had been the one driving her to her meeting just yesterday. She had mocked him, belittled him, and now, here he was, speaking with the kind of authority she had once thought reserved only for the elite. The reality of the situation began to hit Elena. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Frank wasn't just some lowly taxi driver. He was far more than that. As she looked around the room, she noticed the way everyone else in the meeting was acting. Calm, respectful, even deferential. No one seemed surprised by Frank's presence. They treated him with the same regard they had treated her. And then, it came. Frank smiled, his eyes briefly locking with hers before he turned his attention to the rest of the room. "I'm Frank Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Enterprises, and one of the primary investors in this project. I'll be overseeing the final stages of this deal." Elena's blood ran cold. Frank Mitchell. The same name she had seen in the business news. His company was one of the biggest players in the industry, a global leader in innovation and finance. Elena had heard of him, of course, but never in her wildest dreams did she imagine that this humble, quiet man behind the wheel of her taxi was the same person. Her heart raced as she tried to regain her composure. The room was watching her, waiting for her response, but all she could think about was how she had treated him yesterday. The mocking, the condescension, it all came rushing back in vivid detail. She felt small, utterly exposed. For the first time in a long time, she was the one on the defensive. Frank sat confidently at the table, discussing the final details of the deal with ease. His voice was smooth, commanding respect as he outlined the terms. Elena, once the center of attention, now felt like a mere spectator. Every word he spoke carried weight, and she was forced to listen, unable to escape the shame that gnawed at her. As the meeting went on, Elena realized the tables had completely turned. She had been the one who had looked down on him, but now, Frank was the one with the power. He was the one who knew how to negotiate, how to command the room. Elena, for all her wealth and power, was nothing in comparison to this man, whose quiet strength and humility overshadowed everything she had worked so hard to achieve. And as Frank continued to speak, Elena felt a deep, uncomfortable realization settle over her. She had underestimated him in every possible way, and now she was paying the price. As the meeting continued, Elena tried her best to salvage the situation. She straightened her posture and cleared her throat, forcing herself to speak with the same authority she always carried. She glanced around the room, hoping to regain some semblance of control. The business deal was still on the table, and she couldn't afford to let this strange situation derail everything she had worked for. "Frank," Elena began, trying to sound professional, Could you clarify your thoughts on the projected timeline for the expansion? She directed her question toward him, her voice steady. She was trying to be calm, to act as if nothing unusual had happened. She wasn't going to let him see how rattled she felt. Frank, however, didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, he turned to one of the other investors, a seasoned businessman with whom Elena had worked for years. Yes, as I was saying to Mr. Green earlier, the timeline for the expansion can be fast-tracked if we secure the additional funding by the end of the quarter. Elena felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. Frank spoke directly to the others, avoiding eye contact with her entirely. His every word, his every glance felt like a silent rebuke. She had become invisible to him. The man who had once been her subject of mockery now commanded the room, and she felt small, insignificant in comparison. She tried again. I think, she paused, then cleared her throat. I believe the additional funding might require further negotiation, especially with the global partners. She forced a professional smile, but it didn't feel natural. Frank didn't even glance at her this time. He was calm, collected, and unwavering as he continued to steer the conversation toward the details he wanted to focus on. Elena could feel the coldness of his behavior, as if he were deliberately keeping her at a distance. The more he spoke, the more she realized how little she had truly known about him. She had dismissed him so easily, so arrogantly, and now she was paying the price for it. Her mind started to race, flashing back to the taxi ride, the sarcastic comments, the mocking tone, the way she had belittled him for his job and his car. Every word came back to her in sharp, painful clarity. Must be tough, huh? She had said, assuming his life was small and insignificant. You're never going to get ahead if you don't change your mindset, she had told him, as though she knew everything about his life. She had no idea. No idea at all. The guilt started to settle heavily in her chest. How could she have been so callous? How could she have treated him like that? She had reduced him to nothing more than the car he drove and the job he had. And now she understood. Frank wasn't stuck in life. He had simply chosen a different path, a more meaningful one. Elena glanced at Frank once more. He remained calm and composed, his face a perfect mask of professionalism. There was no anger, no bitterness in his demeanor. At least, none that she could see. But she knew now that this was his subtle revenge. He didn't need to lash out or get petty. He had already won. As the meeting finally drew to a close, Elena felt drained. The others filed out of the room, and Frank was one of the last to leave. He stood up, adjusting his jacket, and walked toward her. Elena stiffened, unsure of what to expect. Frank stopped in front of her, his eyes locking with hers for the first time since he had entered the room. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had been defeated. It was a smile that seemed to carry both warmth and distance, a kind of quiet satisfaction she couldn't quite place. I hope we can work together in the future, Elena, he said, his voice smooth and polite. It's always nice to meet someone who isn't afraid to be themselves. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. He had seen through her, all the way through. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to get even. But in that one calm sentence, he had made her realize just how far off the mark she had been. How she had mistaken arrogance for power. How she had dismissed him for reasons that no longer seemed to matter. Frank turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving Elena standing alone. Her mind was swirling, her thoughts a chaotic mess. She had spent so much time climbing to the top, so much time cultivating a persona of strength and superiority. And yet, in that room, it had all crumbled away. She wasn't the confident, untouchable woman she once thought she was. The man she had underestimated had dismantled everything she had built, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. And she felt foolish. Elena stood there for a long moment, reflecting on everything she had just experienced. She had been wrong, completely, utterly wrong, and for the first time in years she questioned everything she had believed about success and power. It wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about mocking others to feel superior. It was about character, humility, and understanding. Frank had taught her that, and she would never forget it. In the weeks that followed the meeting, Elena found herself changed in ways she hadn't expected. The events of that day, particularly her encounter with Frank, weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the arrogance she had shown, the way she had so easily dismissed him based on superficial assumptions. And the guilt. It gnawed at her, a constant reminder of how blind she had been to the world outside her bubble of wealth and privilege. Elena started to reflect deeply on her past actions. She thought about the countless times she had treated people poorly, not just Frank, but so many others. The employees who had worked tirelessly for her, the contractors she dismissed without a second thought, the service workers she had been rude to. She began to understand the pain she had caused, the quiet hurt that came from being looked down on or mocked by someone with more power. It was a harsh realization. The privileged life she had led, one that seemed so perfect, had come at the cost of empathy and understanding. Slowly, Elena began to change. She found herself becoming more mindful of her interactions with others. When her assistants brought her coffee, she thanked them sincerely, noticing the effort they put into their work. She started listening to her employees, truly listening to their ideas and concerns, rather than dismissing them as beneath her. But there was one person she knew she needed to speak to: Frank. She owed him an apology, not just for her actions, but for the assumptions she had made about him. So she reached out to him, asking if he would be willing to meet. To her surprise, Frank agreed. They met at a small cafe, away from the corporate world that had once defined her. Elena sat across from him, her hands nervously clasped together. "I'm so sorry, Frank," she began, her voice sincere, "for everything I said to you, the way I treated you. I was wrong, and I want to learn from you, if you'll let me." Frank smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "It's okay, Elena," he said. "I've forgiven you already. What matters is that you recognize your mistakes and are willing to change." As they continued to talk, Frank shared his views on true success. "It's not about wealth, power, or status," he said gently. "It's about the kind of person you are. How you treat others, how you use your position to make the world a little better. That's where real success lies." Elena listened intently, her heart open. In that moment, she felt a profound shift within herself. The woman who had once valued only power and prestige was now beginning to understand the deeper meaning of success. Over time, Elena became a changed woman. She used her position and influence to help others, offering support to those in need rather than looking down on them. She made sure to mentor those who showed promise, giving them opportunities she once would have overlooked. She made it her mission to create a company culture that valued empathy and respect, one where everyone, no matter their job or background, felt valued. Though Elena would never be the same confident, arrogant woman she had once been, she didn't mourn the loss of that person. Instead, she embraced her transformation. She understood now that true confidence came from kindness, and that real power was rooted in humility. Elena's journey was just beginning. But with Frank's lesson in her heart, she knew that this was the path she had always been meant to take. A path of growth, compassion, and understanding. Elena's encounter with Frank, the taxi driver, had been a wake-up call. A moment that shattered her perceptions of success and power. What she once believed to be the pinnacle of achievement, wealth, status, and control, paled in comparison to the humility, dignity, and kindness Frank embodied. That single moment, when her arrogance collided with Frank's quiet strength, set Elena on a path of deep self-reflection and growth. As time went on, Elena embraced the lessons Frank had unknowingly taught her. She became more compassionate, using her position to lift others rather than belittle them. Her perspective on success transformed. It was no longer about material wealth, but about how she treated people, how she made them feel seen and valued. The powerful lesson Elena learned was simple but profound. Never judge a person by their appearance or job title. The person you look down on today may hold the key to your growth, your transformation, and your understanding of what truly matters. In the end, Elena's story is a reminder to all of us that humility and kindness are the true measures of success, and that the most unexpected encounters can change our lives forever. Thank you for watching this story. Elena's journey of transformation is a powerful reminder that true success is not about wealth or status, but about how we treat others with kindness and respect. We hope this story inspired you to think about your own actions and how we can all grow from the lessons life offers. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and share it with others who might find it inspiring. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that matter. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new video. We're always sharing powerful stories that encourage growth, empathy, and change. Thanks again.